Blur the lines between inside and out with creative projects and a tour of a Japanese garden. All the fun begins right after this. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to the show. And you may be asking yourself, what is he doing? Well, I'm actually making a terrarium. Quite simply, it's a miniature garden in a jar. Coming up a little later, we'll get a hands-on how-to on putting one of these together. It's a great project to share with kids. Today's show was inspired by my love for terrariums. You see, it's a great way to bring a bit of nature inside. Now, we'll also talk about growing herbs indoors. This can be a source of frustration for some folks. And we'll put herbs to use in the kitchen for a great recipe. I'll give you some tips on moving houseplants outside for the summer, as well as some reminders of what to do when it's time to bring them back in for the winter. But first, we're off to the Memphis Botanical Garden for a look at their Japanese garden, where symbolism abounds. Our garden destination segment is coming up right after this. One thing I've learned from my travels is that gardening is a universal passion, but the way people go about executing garden designs varies widely depending on cultural differences. In England, many of the designs I studied were contained and defined, often into garden rooms. Within these defined spaces, gardeners get creative with colors and textures, often approaching a composition with a specific color theme in mind. Now, many of the German gardens I've toured have strong elements mixed in among the landscape. Take, for instance, this dramatic water feature in the back of a typical home, or these sculptures in a garden of a landscape designer. Now, in the Netherlands, property is at a premium, so it's important for homeowners to expand their living spaces outdoors. A popular trend among interior designers in Holland is to create clean, simple interior spaces, which garden designers have picked up on and used outside. Now, this isn't to say that you're not going to find an English-inspired garden in Germany, or a garden with clean, simple lines in England, or even a Japanese garden here in the States. In fact, I visited several fine examples of Japanese gardens in this country, including this one at the Chicago Botanic Garden. And how about this Japanese garden at the Memphis Botanic Garden? Gina Harris takes us on a tour of this garden and tells us a bit about the symbolism that can be found in its design.
This is our Japanese Garden of Tranquility. It's called Seijaku-En, which translates to Garden of Tranquility. And the Japanese garden actually originated from a Chinese garden that has the red bridge. That's where the red bridge came from. And in most Japanese gardens, this would be a really steep one, but ours is not so steep that people can't get over. We also have a zigzag bridge, and the purpose of the zigzag bridge in the Japanese garden is their belief is that you have good kami, or good spirits, and evil kami. And evil kami can only walk in a straight line. So all Japanese gardens have a zigzag bridge because they believe if you cross this, then your evil spirits cannot follow you and they fall off into the water. So you lose your evil spirits when you go through the Japanese garden. The Japanese garden provides home for a lot of wildlife, such as the fish and the turtles, and we have the koi fish here, and they're very precious in Japanese culture. They actually breed the koi like we breed dogs. They breed them for their markings, and some are very valuable.
This Japanese garden showcases water prominently, but in other gardens, such as the one in Chicago, another style called dry landscape is featured. This dry style has been in existence for centuries. You notice over and over in dry landscape Zen gardens two main elements. The first is rocks used to form mountains, and the second is sand to form flowing water. The sand used in Japanese gardens isn't beach sand, but crushed granite, which comes in shades of white, gray to beige. You wouldn't want to use light-colored sand or granite in sunny areas because the sun will reflect off it, producing a blinding glare. Now, bridges and paths are also common elements in these dry landscape gardens. They're functional in that they allow you to cross over the garden, and they can also open up views that may not otherwise be seen. So why don't we make our own little Zen garden? It's really quite simple and only takes a few ingredients. And it's the sort of thing that you could place on a table, say a coffee table, or even your desk at work. It's a great way to reduce stress. Now, you'll need to start with a tray. I'm using a galvanized tray like this. Now, since this is going to be an indoor garden, I'm just going to use sand. This is sand that you can buy by the bag at your local home improvement store. And then to represent the mountains, I want to use some of these beautiful polished rocks. Just take a look at these. Now, let me just move these little tools out of the way that I found online. This is the simplest garden you will ever make. You just pour in the sand. There you go, that should be plenty. Spread it out just a bit. You can already see where we're going with this. All right. And then it's just a matter of placing the stones in groups, like so. I really like these dark ones. Stand them up on their edge, maybe some over here. It's just fun to arrange them. And then I can take these little tools and pull them across the sand and create lines that symbolize flowing water. This is the part that relieves the most stress for me. Now, if you're challenged by growing things, this is the garden for you. It is so simple. Now, if you want an indoor garden that's easy to maintain and full of lush plants, then this might be more your speed. We'll take a look at the time-honored craft of terrariums next. Well, as you can see, I'm well underway with my terrarium. But let's go back and talk about some of the ingredients for creating a successful terrarium. What's so exciting to me about these is that they're little miniature gardens that you can have indoors. So if you don't like yard work, well, maybe this is the answer. Now, what I started with was a really nice big jar, and this jar comes equipped with a lid. You want to start with a good soil. What I'm using here is a soil specifically blended for potting up containers. Now, the fun part is picking out the plants. There's a wide range of plants you can use. You can go to my website and get a complete list for plants good for growing in terrariums. But let me give you a few ideas. What I'm using here is a basic little English ivy. You can see it here. It's a tiny one. And then this one I love. Just look at the pattern on this leaf. This is a white-veined Fittonia. I'm going to finish out the composition with a bit of this little Seijaku-En or peacock moss. Now, what I find with terrariums, since you need tiny plants, you can buy a quart-sized plant or a 4-inch plant like this and actually divide it by gently just tearing the roots, as you can see here. See, there we go. I have half a Seijaku-En, and I'm going to tuck the little guy right in here to finish out the planting scheme. Well, there you have it, a beautiful tiny landscape. Now, there are a few things you'll want to keep in mind. I have a question for you. What is the #1 killer of houseplants? Overwatering. And the same goes for taking care of your terrarium. Now, what you can do is you can put a layer of gravel, if you like, in the bottom of the terrarium. Now, if you think you've overwatered, just tilt the lid so a lot of the excess moisture can evaporate out until the moisture level is about where you think it needs to be. Now, when it comes to feeding these plants, you want to back off a little. You don't want to over-fertilize because the idea here is to keep the plants small. Now, one of the things you can do to finish off your terrarium is use sphagnum moss. Again, this is like making a little garden indoors. So this will be like our mulch, our forest floor that we're going to use to cover the soil in the terrarium. Now, it's important for you to not let the container get in the way of you enjoying a terrarium. You see, just about any kind of jar will work as long as the glass is clear. You've got a wide mouth so you can get your hands in there and work. You can use these apothecary jars, but I used a fish bowl. That was my first terrarium, and then I graduated up to an old aquarium. It was great. I created a little miniature landscape and put in some toy dinosaurs. During our visit to the Memphis Botanic Garden, we met up with Rick Pudwell to give us more tips about terrariums.
Terrariums can be decorative. They can serve various functions in the house. Sometimes it's a way to grow plants that normally you couldn't grow in the dry atmosphere of a climate-controlled home. Plants that'll work in terrariums can include actual mosses, small specimens of Generiids such as this African violet, Seijaku-En, which are a fern ally, some of the smaller species of ferns such as this button fern or the maidenhair, and then Ficus pumila, which is creeping fig. There are other plants that will work, but I think you get the idea that they need to be moisture-loving plants that will grow in medium to low light. Container like this probably take, maybe a pint and a half of water to moisten it since the soil was fairly on the dry side. And maintenance of the terrarium is crucial in that you need to check it maybe once a week to be sure that the soil hasn't dried out if it's one like this without a top. After watering the terrarium, you want to locate it where you're going to keep it in your home. A good location in good, strong, bright light, like a north or east window where the hot sun isn't going to cook plants through the glass, would be ideal.
Some thoughts on giving your houseplants a summer vacation? Plus, we'll answer a viewer question about growing herbs indoors. That's all coming up. Now, we've talked about this idea of bringing nature inside, but what about giving those houseplants a bit of a reprieve and taking them outdoors? All of us need a change from time to time from our routines, and our houseplants are certainly no exception. When the season begins to change with longer days and milder temperatures, it's the perfect opportunity for our houseplants to enjoy a change of scenery by moving them outdoors. The time of year to do this is when the outside temperatures are close to the temperature inside your home. Now, a good time to make this shift is when the temperature is, say, between 65 and 68 degrees. You don't want to throw them into shock with a drastic change. Whether you have fine textured houseplants like this asparagus fern or something broadleaf like this prayer plant, you'll want to be careful where you place them. You see, if the sun is too bright and intense, it can cause the leaves to burn or blister. The shade of a porch where they get indirect light can be ideal, or under the shade of a large tree where filtered, dappled light is available will also work. Placing them under a tree will also give the plants the added benefit of being watered by an occasional summer rain. Before I move them to their new temporary home, I inspect each plant for pests, repot any of those that have outgrown their containers into larger accommodation, and I fertilize, as now they're in an active growth phase and can use the food. For more tips on caring for houseplants, log on to palensmith.com. Okay, now it's time for viewer mail. Today we have a letter from Stephanie in Dearborn. Stephanie writes, "Dear Alan, I haven't had much luck growing herbs indoors. What's the secret?" Well, this is a great question, Stephanie, because I know a lot of people who don't have a garden or a yard, but they'd love to have fresh herbs. But you know, one of the things I have to admit is that growing herbs outdoors is a lot easier. But if you grow them inside, there's some things you'll want to know. You see, some herbs just do better inside. Now for basil, you just better forget about it. It's not going to thrive in your kitchen window, but oregano, chives, mint, rosemary, and thyme just might. And I find that thyme is an ideal complement to fish and poultry. Starting herbs from seeds will allow you to get creative with your indoor garden design. I like to cluster pots that are all in the same color family and complement my home's decor. Placing the pots on an attractive tray will help with caring for them. Plus, this will keep your windowsills free from water damage, and it's a nice way to unify this little indoor garden. I have to say that some of my favorite herbs, such as lemon verbena, bay, and rosemary, I keep in containers all the time. You see, I can't leave them outdoors because the winter temperatures in my climate plummet. So I set them up on the loggia when temperatures begin to drop, and before it freezes, I move them into my lath house. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that if you do decide to bring herbs in that you've grown outdoors, then you'll want to treat them as you would houseplants. That means giving them a little TLC they might need. If you're not careful, you may be bringing in more than just your houseplants. You see, hitchhikers can be a problem. During the summer, any number of pests can get in the soil and on your plants, and some of them are so small you need a magnifying glass to see them. To keep these little stowaways from creating an infestation in your home, I like to saturate my houseplants with an insecticide. I use an insecticidal soap because it's safe, and I always try to get the underside of the leaves. After spraying, I'll leave them outside for 2 or 3 days. Give them one more check before I take them inside. Now, just like outside, herbs inside require a certain amount of light, 5 to 6 hours at least. You see, if you place them in a hot window in the summer, say one that faces the west, well, that may be a little too much, so back them off so the light is slightly indirect. When it comes to water, again, treat them like you would your herbs outside. Keep the soil consistently moist. If you let them dry out, well, that's a recipe for failure. And you also want to keep them away from sources of heat, like a fireplace or a vent. Now up next, let's put some herbs to work in your kitchen. A summer treat coming up. There are certain foods that just seem to go with the season, like potato salad for summer. It's perfect for picnics, family reunions, or eating with something tasty off the grill. One of my favorite recipes for potato salad makes good use of an herb from the garden, dill. This is a flavorful recipe that's easy to make, and what I like the most about it is that it's served chilled. I started with about 7 cups of sliced potatoes. I cut them in discs like this and left the skins on. I cooked these until they were tender and rinsed and drained them. And then I put them in a bowl and covered them with about 1/2 cup of vinaigrette or Italian salad dressing. I did this while they were still hot so they would absorb more of the flavor of the dressing. These had been marinating in the refrigerator for a couple of hours, and now I'm lifting them out of the dressing. And I'm putting them into this other bowl so I can add the remaining ingredients. They are 1/2 cup of sour cream, 1/2 cup of mayonnaise, and 2 teaspoons of horseradish, 3 green onions finely chopped, along with 2 tablespoons of fresh dill, and salt and pepper to taste. Just blend all of these together and fold them into the potatoes. Refrigerate until ready to serve. If you'd like this recipe for fresh dill potato salad, just check out our website.
In this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.